Welcome back. This is It's About Time. Let's get right to it.
Welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're on part 3 of Unveiling the Source.
Part 3 already.
I know, right? And it keeps getting more interesting.
Definitely.
In the last 2 episodes, we covered some pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, we did.
But today, we're going to tackle something even, I think, more thought-provoking.
The way.
Florida's criminal justice system.
I think you'll find that Florida's approach to LWOP, it reveals kind of a lot about the state's overall philosophy on crime and punishment.
Oh, interesting.
It raises some questions about, what we prioritize as a society, I guess.
For sure.
Public safety, rehabilitation, and then, of course,
and how we spend taxpayer dollars.
always a big one.
Always a big one, yeah.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who maybe aren't super familiar with all the lingo, could you explain what recidivism means in this context?
Recidivism basically means the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend. So, how likely are they to commit another crime?
Okay.
It helps us kind of measure how effective our criminal justice system is at deterring crime and rehabilitating offenders.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
So let's rewind about 20 years.
Okay.
Back then, both Florida and New York had pretty similar prison populations.
Right.
Even though Florida's overall population was smaller. But now, totally different story.
Yeah, totally different. So fast forward to today.
Yeah.
Florida and New York have almost the exact same population size.
Wow.
But Florida's prison population has
Exploded.
Yeah, exploded. Exactly.
While New York's has actually shrunk.
Yeah. And what's even crazier is that both states have seen similar reductions in crime rates. Yeah, over the same period.
So, crime has gone down in both states.
Pretty much the same, yeah.
But Florida's prison population has gone way up. That's fascinating.
It really makes you think, does a tough-on-crime approach actually equal lower crime rates?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like maybe not.
Hard to say for sure, but
Right.
The numbers are interesting.
For sure. And thinking about these 2 states,
Right.
they took really different paths, right?
Very different.
So Florida went all in on harsher sentencing.
Right.
They abolished parole.
Yep.
But New York kept parole and focused more on rehabilitation.
Yeah, so 2 totally opposite approaches.
And we see that reflected in their prison populations, right?
Exactly.
So thinking about this for our listener, do you think harsher sentences are always the best way to go? Or should we maybe be focusing more on rehab, especially when we consider things like recidivism? It's a tough question.
Yeah, no easy answers.
But it makes you wonder about the long-term effects of these policies, right?
Absolutely.
Remember how Florida is known as a retirement destination?
Yeah, the Sunshine State.
The Sunshine State. Well, it might be becoming the retirement state for prisoners, too.
Interesting point. And it's not just about where they're living, right?
Mm-hmm.
It also has a financial impact.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so Florida Tax Watch found that it costs 4 times as much to house an elderly inmate compared to a younger one.
Whoa, 4 times?
4 times, yeah.
That's a lot.
It is. So you're looking at roughly $70,000 per year to incarcerate an elderly inmate
Yep.
versus about $18,000 for a younger one.
Jeez.
So that means Florida taxpayers are paying millions extra every year just to care for this aging prison population.
It's like a whole other layer of cost.
Exactly. And it's only going to get bigger as the prison population continues to age.
So is this sustainable? Long term, can Florida afford this approach?
It's a question that policymakers really need to grapple with.
Because it's not just about being tough on crime.
Right.
It's about, dollars and cents.
Absolutely. There are real economic consequences to these choices.
Right. It's like we're paying a premium for a system that may not even be giving us what it promised.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And that brings us to another big question. Are LWOP inmates really as dangerous as we think they are?
That's the perception, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people, myself included, have this image of lifers as
The worst of the worst.
Yeah, hardened criminals who are beyond hope.
Right. But is that really true?
Well, that's what we're here to find out, right?
Exactly.
What does the research tell us?
Well, research from organizations like the Sentencing Project, the Stanford Criminal Justice Center, and the Urban Institute have all found that lifers actually have the lowest recidivism rates of all offender categories.
Really?
Yeah, often below 10%.
So wait, less than 10% of lifers who are released commit another crime.
That's what the studies show.
That's way lower than I would guess.
Yeah, it's definitely surprising to a lot of people.
So then why do we think of them as so dangerous?
I think a lot of it has to do with how they're portrayed in the media.
Yeah, the news always focuses on the scary stuff.
Exactly. We're bombarded with images of violent criminals, which creates this sense of fear and reinforces the idea that LWOP is necessary to keep us safe.
Okay, so it's like a perception versus reality thing.
Exactly. We rarely hear about the lifers who've turned their lives around, who are contributing positively to society.
So there's a whole other side to the story that we're not hearing.
Right, and that contributes to this disconnect between what the data shows and what the public believes.
It makes you wonder if we're really serving the interests of justice by keeping these people locked up for life.
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is, and it's one we need to grapple with.
Absolutely. We can't just ignore the evidence.
Right. We need to be having these conversations and really examining our assumptions.
I completely agree.
It's about more than just punishment.
It's about fairness. It's about rehabilitation. It's about what kind of society we want to be.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So are you ready to dive deeper into this?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right, let's get into it. It's a tough question. And it kind of leads us into this whole debate about LWOP versus the death penalty.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Judge Lawrence Myers of the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, he once said, life without parole is just another form of the death penalty, a slower version of it.
That's a pretty intense statement.
It is.
It makes you think about the weight of both those sentences.
Yeah, definitely.
And speaking of the death penalty,
Yeah.
didn't Florida have the highest rate of overturned death penalty cases in the whole country?
They do, yeah.
Like, what does that even say about our justice system?
Well, it's definitely a red flag, right?
Yeah.
If death penalty convictions, with all the safeguards they have, all the appeals are being overturned so often,
Yeah.
doesn't that make you wonder about LWOP sentences too?
It does. It really does.
Like how many of those might be wrong?
Right. It makes you think about the fairness of it all.
Absolutely.
I mean, death penalty cases, they get all these specialized lawyers and tons of appeals.
Right, they have a whole team working on them.
But people with LWOP, they often go through the same process as someone who, like, shoplifted.
Exactly, it's a huge disparity.
Like, shouldn't a sentence that means you're going to die in prison?
Right.
Shouldn't that have the most scrutiny?
You would think so, but that's not always how it works.
It's kind of backwards.
Yeah.
So we've been focusing on, like, the negatives of LWOP, the
Yeah.
costs, the possible unfairness.
Right.
But shouldn't we also consider, like, the potential for rehabilitation?
Yeah, absolutely. We touched on it earlier with the low recidivism rates.
Right, right.
Seems like lifers can change.
Yeah.
But then we exclude them from programs because they can't get out anyway.
It doesn't make sense.
It's a missed opportunity, really.
Think about all the experience they have.
Exactly. They've seen it all, the whole cycle of crime and punishment.
Yeah,
They know what leads people down the wrong path,
right.
and we're just, like, wasting that knowledge.
It's almost like the people who could help the most are the ones we've given up on.
Exactly. That's where the idea of restorative justice comes in.
Restorative justice.
Yeah, like, what if we could use the experiences of these lifers to help younger offenders?
Oh, wow, like mentors.
Exactly. Instead of warehousing them,
Right.
we could make them assets.
That's a really cool idea.
And it's already happening in some places.
Really?
Yeah, like in Pennsylvania, there's this guy, Craig Gatesman.
Okay.
He's a lifer, but he runs this program that helps young people who've gotten in trouble with the law.
So he's like a mentor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there are tons of stories like that.
That's awesome.
It shows that even in prison, people can still contribute.
Yeah.
But the public needs to know about this stuff.
Right, because they probably don't.
Exactly. They need to understand that lifers aren't all the same.
Right.
There are a lot of them who could be productive members of society.
Yeah.
And it seems like public opinion is changing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, more people are realizing the system is flawed,
Okay.
and they're demanding change.
So are you saying there's hope for Florida?
I think there is, but it'll take a lot of work.
Like what?
Well, policymakers need to be willing to change the laws,
Okay.
and the public needs to be educated about LWOP.
So they can make informed decisions.
Exactly. And challenge their own biases.
Right, right.
And what about the lifers themselves?
Yeah, what about them?
They have a role to play too.
What do you mean?
Their voices need to be heard, their stories need to be shared.
Right.
They can be powerful advocates for change.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, they have a unique perspective.
So for our listener, if they could only take away one thing from this whole conversation, what would you want it to be?
That's a good question. I think the most important takeaway is that LWOP it's just this really complex issue
Right.
with consequences that go way beyond just the individual.
Yeah, it really affects like the whole fabric of our society, you know?
Yeah, for sure. It's about our values,
Our priority
how we see justice.
on whether we believe in like redemption.
Exactly.
I think it's easy to get caught up in all the numbers and stuff.
Yeah, the statistics, the legal arguments.
But we can't forget that, you know?
There are real people behind all of this.
Real people whose lives are being shaped by these policies.
Yeah, and we talked about those overturned death penalty cases
Right.
and how that makes you question LWOP sentencing too.
Yeah, like how many of those sentences might be wrong
But even beyond that, like, have you ever thought about the psychological impact?
of a life sentence?
Yeah, like, imagine that.
It's got to be heavy.
It is. The despair, the hopelessness.
Knowing you'll never get out.
No matter what you do.
No matter how much you change,
Yeah.
it makes you wonder about the point of punishment.
Right, like, is it just about revenge?
Making people suffer.
Or is it about something more?
Like rehabilitation.
Giving people a chance to become better?
To re-enter society.
It's a question every society has to answer.
And the answer says a lot about us.
Yeah, about our humanity.
Yeah. It seems like Florida's LWOP system is kind of caught between these two ideas.
Like two opposite forces pulling on it.
Yeah, on one side, you have this tough on crime approach,
The need for retribution.
keeping the public safe.
Right.
But then there's this growing feeling that rehabilitation is possible.
Even for people who've committed serious crimes.
So, like, where do we go from here? What can our listeners do if they want to be part of this change?
Well, first of all, just being aware is huge.
Okay.
Talk to your friends and family about this.
Share what you've learned.
Challenge the way people think about crime and punishment.
Yeah, start those conversations.
Exactly. And then get involved politically.
Oh, right.
Contact your representatives.
Tell them this matter.
Support organizations that are working for reform.
Because every voice makes a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
This has been a really insightful conversation.
I agree. I've learned a lot.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, we really encourage you to think critically about everything we've discussed today.
Yeah.
What do you want our justice system to be?
Is it about revenge or rehabilitation?
What kind of society do we want to live in?
These are big questions.
That they're worth asking.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Florida's LWOP system.
We hope it's given you some new perspectives.
And maybe even inspired you to get involved in the movement for a more just and compassionate approach to criminal justice.
Remember, change starts with us.
With our awareness.
Our willingness to challenge the status quo.
And our commitment to creating a society that values every human being.
Join us next time as we continue our series, Unveiling the Source.
Where we'll explore another fascinating and unexpected aspect of criminal justice in Florida.
It's about time.